stood outside the Meridian Club on a Thursday evening in November, watching the valets park cars that cost more than my first 2 years of rent combined. The air smelled like exhaust and expensive cologne, and I was wearing a blazer I had owned since graduate school. I bought it at a consignment shop in Austin for $32. I had worn it to every job interview that mattered, and to my grandmother's funeral, and now to this. My brother thought I was coming to congratulate him. He had no idea. I need to go back, though, because none of what happened that night makes sense without understanding what the 12 years before it looked like. My brother and I grew up in a house where the rules were simple and never spoken aloud. He was the one who mattered. I was the one who was tolerated. My father never said that, not exactly, but he did not need to. He communicated it in the way he saved the newspaper sports section for my brother every morning and left the rest of the paper in a pile on the counter. He communicated it by taking my brother to his office on Take Your Kid to Work Day every single year, without once asking if I wanted to come. He communicated at every dinner table, every vacation, every school play, where he sat in the front row for my brother's baseball games and told me he was too busy to come to my graduation from the University of Texas. He was not too busy. He was in Houston at my brother's company retreat. My mother tried. I want to be honest about that. She was not a bad person. She was a tired one. She had spent 30 years managing my father's moods and my brother's ego, and somewhere in that process she had lost the ability to push back on either of them. She would squeeze my hand under the dinner table when my father said something cutting. She would leave encouraging notes in my room. She told me once, when I was 17 and crying in the car after yet another dinner, when my brother announced a new achievement and my father looked at me like he was waiting for me to match it and failing, that some people could only see what was right in front of their face, that someday they would see me. I waited a long time for someday. My brother is 4 years older than me. His name is Elliot. He works in commercial real estate development, which is a polite way of saying he borrows other people's money to build things and collects a significant fee in the process. He is charming in the way that men who have never been told no tend to be charming. Magnetic at a cocktail party. Exhausting up close. My father worshipped him. Still does, probably, though I would not know for certain. I went into software engineering. Specifically, I spent 6 years building tools for healthcare data infrastructure, which is the least glamorous sentence I know how to say, but which turns out to be one of the most financially interesting spaces in the country, once you understand what is actually happening inside it. I was good at it. I was very good at it, though nobody in my family knew that, because I stopped explaining my work after the 3rd or 4th time my father changed the subject mid-sentence, or my brother made a joke about how I should learn to code something useful. They thought I was a mid-level developer at a startup somewhere in Austin. That was not wrong, exactly. It was just missing most of the picture. Let me tell you what the picture actually looked like. When I was 26, I was working 60-hour weeks at a healthcare tech company that paid me well and bored me completely. The work was solid but safe. My manager was kind. My co-workers were smart. And I could feel, every single day, that I was building something for someone else when I had an idea in the back of my head that I could not stop thinking about. The idea was this. Healthcare providers in rural and underserved areas were drowning in administrative overhead, not because the problems were complicated, but because the existing software solutions were built for large hospital systems with full IT departments. The average rural clinic was running on tools designed for someone 10 times their size, paying licensing fees that consumed a real percentage of their operating budget, and spending hours every week on workarounds for features they did not need that got in the way of features they desperately did. I knew I could fix that. I had known it for 2 years before I finally quit my job and did something about it. I called my company ClearPath. I built the first version of the product entirely by myself, working from my apartment, eating whatever was on sale at the H-E-B near my complex. I had $11,000 in savings and a credit card I was terrified to use. The first 3 months, I made no money. The 4th month, I had my first paying customer, a small family practice in Lubbock that had been making do with spreadsheets, because the software they had tried was too complicated for their staff to actually use without a dedicated training program. They paid me $180 a month. I nearly cried. By the end of year 1, I had 14 customers. By year 2, 63. By year 3, I had stopped counting individual customers and started thinking in terms of revenue, which had crossed 7 figures annually and was accelerating. I did not tell my family. This was not a dramatic decision. I did not sit down one day and decide to keep my success a secret as some kind of strategic revenge plot. It happened more slowly than that. In the first year, I did not tell them because I was terrified of failing in front of people who already expected me to. By year 2, when things were clearly working, I did not tell them because I had grown so accustomed to not talking about my work at family events that it had simply become the shape of my presence there. I showed up. I listened to my brother talk about his projects. I answered vague questions about how things were going with equally vague answers. Fine. Busy. Getting there. They assumed getting there meant I was still struggling. I let them assume. My brother got married 5 years ago. His wife is named Phoebe. She is not unkind, but she mirrors him, which means she has a way of making you feel invisible when he is in the room. Their wedding was in Scottsdale. My father gave a toast that lasted 11 minutes and mentioned my brother's professional accomplishments 4 times. He mentioned me once in a single sentence to note that I was also in attendance. I smiled through the whole thing. The company I had built by that point was worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $8 million on paper. I was working on closing a Series A round that would put us in a different neighborhood entirely. My father did not know. My brother did not know. My mother suspected something was different about my life. Mothers always do. But she did not ask and I did not offer. The thing that changed everything started with a phone call from my brother about 8 months ago. He called on a Sunday afternoon, which was unusual. We talked maybe 4 times a year, always at the holidays or when our parents insisted we coordinate something. The call started the way his calls usually did, which is to say it started with him talking about himself. He had a new project, a big one, a mixed-use development in the Nashville corridor, which had been one of the hottest markets in the country for commercial real estate for several years running. He had assembled a strong team. He had the land under contract. He had preliminary designs. What he did not have was funding. Not entirely anyway. He had commitments from 2 investors, but he needed a third to close the round. His original third had backed out 3 weeks earlier. Some issue with their own fund, and he was now scrambling. The project had a hard deadline. The land contract would expire. If he did not close the round in the next 60 days, the whole thing fell apart. He needed $2.3 million. I listened to all of this. I asked a few questions, mostly to understand the structure of the deal. He answered them slightly impatient at first, then more carefully when he realized I was asking the right things. Then he asked if I had any connections who might be interested. I told him I would look into it. I did not tell him that I was, at that moment, sitting in my Austin apartment reviewing term sheets from institutional investors who were valuing my company at $42 million. I want to be clear about something. I was not planning what happened next as some elaborate scheme. I was thinking it through, the way I think through every decision, which is carefully and honestly. The question I kept coming back to was not whether I could help my brother. It was whether I should. And the answer that kept coming back was complicated. Elliot had spent our entire childhood benefiting from a structure that diminished me. He had not built it, but he had never questioned it. He had accepted every advantage without acknowledgement, and watched me be passed over without ever once saying, within my hearing at least, that something was wrong. He was not a villain. He was something more frustrating than a villain. He was someone who had simply never been asked to notice. But here is the thing about being someone who has never been asked to notice. Eventually, life asks you, and that is when you find out who someone actually is. I decided to show up to his investor dinner. He was hosting it at the Meridian Club in Dallas. A dinner for prospective backers, a chance to make the case in person. He had mentioned it offhand, invited me half-heartedly in the way you invite someone when you expect them to decline. I said maybe. He said okay. He sent me the details and I bookmarked them, and he probably forgot about it entirely. I called my contact at the investment firm 2 days before the dinner. The firm is called Vantage Capital. They had been introduced to me through a mutual connection in the healthcare tech space, and we had been in conversation for several months about a potential partnership. The managing partner there is a woman named Audra Fleming. I had met her twice in person. She was sharp and direct and had an excellent eye for deals that other people in her space were undervaluing. I asked Audra if she had heard of my brother's Nashville project. She had. She had been approached, actually, through a different channel, but had not made a decision yet. She was still doing diligence. I told her I was going to the investor dinner Thursday night. I suggested she attend as well. I told her there was context about the project she did not have yet. She was curious enough to say yes. I wore the $32 blazer. I did not dress up. I wanted to arrive looking exactly the way my family expected me to look, which was comfortable but unimpressive, someone who was getting along fine but nothing more. I took a rideshare from my hotel. I arrived exactly 12 minutes after the start time. My brother saw me from across the room, and his face did a complicated thing that took about 2 seconds to resolve into a smile. He crossed the room, shook my hand rather than hugging me, and said he was surprised I made it. My father was there. He stood near the window with a drink, talking to one of my brother's investors, and when I walked in he gave me the look he always gave me at my brother's events, the one that said he was pleased I had come, but slightly puzzled by my presence, the way you might feel about a houseplant that had showed up to a board meeting. My mother found me first. She held my arm for a moment and asked quietly if I was doing okay. She had been asking me that more often lately, with a specific quality in her voice that suggested she knew more than she was saying. I told her I was doing well. The dinner was set up around a long table in a private room. My brother stood at one end and walked through the project in detail. I will give him this. He is a good presenter. He understands how to read a room, how to hold attention, when to use humor, and when to let a number land in silence. The Nashville project was genuinely interesting. Good location, smart design. The fundamentals were real. His problem was the gap in his capital stack and the fact that 60 days was not a lot of time. I sat near the far end of the table. Audra arrived about 20 minutes into the presentation, and my brother introduced her as a guest of one of his existing investors, which was true enough. I watched her watch him. She was taking notes. After the formal presentation, when people were moving around the room with drinks, my father drifted toward me. He was in a good mood, which with him means he was expansive rather than critical. He asked how things were going. I said fine. He asked if I was still doing the tech stuff. I said yes. He asked if I had met the investors at the table, and when I said I knew one of them, he seemed genuinely surprised, the way people are surprised when a background character does something that requires them to update their understanding of who that character is. Then my brother appeared at our side. He was checking in, making the rounds, and he put his hand on my shoulder in the way that older brothers do when they want to include you in something without fully including you. He told my father about his funding gap. He said he was close but not there yet, and that he hoped the evening would help. He said something that I have been turning over in my mind ever since, because I think he meant it as a compliment, and I think he also meant it as exactly what it sounded like. He said that I was actually in tech, and he had asked me to see if anyone in my network might be interested, but that probably was not realistic given the scale of what he needed. 2.3 million. My father nodded. He looked at me with an expression that was almost kind, the way you look at someone you have underestimated in a small way. Not enough to actually revise your opinion, just enough to feel briefly generous. He said something like, "Well, it was nice of you to try." I set down my drink. Audra was standing 8 feet away. I said, "Actually, I should introduce you both to someone." The 3 of us walked over. I introduced my brother to Audra Fleming. I introduced my father. I watched Audra's expression shift almost imperceptibly when she processed the last name, the connection she was now making. My brother went into his pitch. Audra asked several questions. Good ones, the kind that let you know she already understood the structure and was now testing the assumptions. My brother handled them well enough, though he glanced at me twice with an expression I had not seen on his face since we were children, something uncertain. Then Audra asked him who had connected us. He said it was through a mutual contact in his network, which was technically accurate. Audra looked at me. She said, "That is interesting, because his sister has been one of the most impressive founders I have had the chance to work with over the past 8 months." The room did not go quiet the way rooms do in movies. Life is not like that. The nearby conversations kept going. The server refilled someone's water glass across the table, but my father stopped moving. My brother's mouth opened slightly. Audra said she had been in conversation with my company for the better part of a year and that the growth trajectory was unlike anything she had seen in the healthcare tech space. She said she had been debating whether to bring it up tonight, but that given the context she thought it was relevant. My father looked at me. He said, "What is she talking about?" It was not quite a question. It was the voice he used when something had happened outside his understanding of the world and he needed someone to correct it. I told him about ClearPath. Not everything, not right then. Just the shape of it, the problem I had identified, the product I had built, the customers, the revenue, the round I was in the middle of closing. My brother said nothing. He was doing the math. My father said, "You have been running a company." I said yes. He said, "For how long?" I said 6 years. He said, "And you never said anything." I could have said a lot of things to that. I thought about all of them in the 2 seconds before I answered. I thought about the baseball games and the company retreat and the toast at the wedding and the look on his face every time I tried to explain what I actually did for a living, and he found something else to focus on. I said, "You never asked." My father looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on ice that had been cracking for years without his notice. The particular kind of stun that comes not from surprise at what someone else has done, but from the first real confrontation with what you yourself have failed to do. My brother found his voice first. He asked how big the round was. I told him. He asked what the valuation was. I told him that too. There was a long pause. Around us, the dinner party continued. Someone laughed at something near the bar. My mother appeared at the edge of our small circle, and I watched her read the faces and understand, with the particular radar of someone who has been paying quiet attention for 30 years, exactly what had just happened. My brother said, "Leah, I didn't know." "I know," I said. He said, "I should have asked. That one landed differently. I'd expected defensiveness. I'd expected my father to reframe the narrative, to find some way to position himself correctly inside it. I had not expected my brother to simply say, without any packaging around it, that he should have asked. My father cleared his throat. He said something about being glad things had gone well for me. I looked at him for a moment, not with anger exactly, with something more like clarity. I said I appreciated that, and then I said that I hoped the evening had been productive for Elliot's project. We stood there for another minute or two. Audra was gracious. She told my brother she would continue her diligence on the Nashville project and that she appreciated the introduction, looking at me when she said that. I excused myself. I went to find my mother. She was standing near the window where my father had been standing when I arrived. She had a glass of white wine she had not been drinking. When I came to stand beside her, she reached over and took my hand without looking at me, the same way she used to when I was small, and something had hurt me, and she did not know how to fix it. I said, "I'm okay." She said, "I know you are. I've known for a while." I asked her what she meant. She said she had done something she was not sure I would forgive her for. She told me that 2 years ago, when I had been vague about a work trip in a way that struck her as different from my usual vagueness, she had looked up my company. She did not explain how. Mothers have ways. She said she had found the early press coverage, a brief mention in an Austin business journal, when I had won a small regional award for healthcare innovation. She said she had cried for an hour, and then she had not said anything, because she did not know how to say it without having to explain why she had not said something sooner, which would have meant explaining why she had let things be the way they were for as long as they had been. I stood there with that for a moment. I told her I was not angry at her. I meant it. Anger at my mother for her silences felt like being angry at someone for being afraid, and I had spent enough of my life being afraid of things to understand that it was not always a choice. But I also told her the truth, which was that I had needed someone in my corner for a long time, and that the cost of not having that was real, even if it was in the past now. That I had built everything I built carrying the weight of believing my own family thought I was worth less than I was. That the weight had made me work harder, and it had also made me lonelier than I should have been. She was quiet. Then she said she was sorry. Just that. No explanation, no packaging. I believed her. We stood at the window together until my brother came to find me. He asked if we could talk. We stepped out into the hallway. He leaned against the wall and looked at his shoes for a moment, which is something he has done since he was 12 when he was working up to saying something he did not want to say. He told me he felt like an idiot. I told him that was not what I was after. He said he knew, but that he felt it anyway. He said he had spent so long in the role of the one who mattered that he had genuinely not registered that the role had been constructed at my expense. He said that was not an excuse. He said he wished he had a better word for it than oblivious. I told him oblivious was honest enough. He asked if I would consider investing in the Nashville project. I told him I had already thought about it. I told him the deal was actually solid and that if he could send me the full packet, I would review it seriously. I was not going to invest as a favor. I was going to look at it the way I looked at any potential investment, on the merits. He nodded. He seemed slightly caught off guard by that, like he had expected either a yes or a no, and had not prepared for being treated like a professional. I told him that was how it was going to work going forward. Not charity, not grudges, just actual honesty. He said that sounded fair. My father found us in the hallway before we went back inside. He had a look on his face I had genuinely never seen before. Not regret exactly. My father is not a man who moves easily into regret, but something adjacent to it, something that looked like a person encountering the gap between who they believed they were and who they had actually been. He said he wanted to say something. I waited. He said that he had been proud of my brother in a way he had never been equally proud of me, and that until tonight he had told himself that was because of who we each were, rather than because of how he had treated us. He said he understood now that was not true. It was not an apology. I want to be honest about that. It was the beginning of one, maybe, the raw material. I did not hug him. I did not tell him it was fine. I told him I appreciated him saying it. I told him that I hoped it was the start of something rather than the end of a conversation. He said he hoped so too. We went back inside. I stayed another hour. I talked to Audra briefly. She told me she had decided she liked the Nashville project and that she would be in touch with my brother. She also said she wanted to schedule a call the following week to finalize terms on ClearPath, which I told her worked for me. I said goodbye to my mother last. She held on a second longer than usual. In the rideshare back to my hotel, I watched Dallas slide past the windows, all highways and office park lights and the particular flatness of Texas at night. I had grown up driving these roads. I had spent years feeling small inside this landscape. And now I was sitting in the back of a car, thinking about $42 million and my brother's face when he did the math. And my father's voice when he said the thing that was almost an apology. I did not feel triumphant. That surprised me. I had expected to feel something sharper. What I felt instead was settled, the way you feel after you have been holding something heavy for a long time and have finally put it down in a place where it belongs. The next morning, my brother texted me the deal packet for Nashville. It was thorough and well organized, which I noted. I spent Sunday afternoon going through it. The fundamentals held up. I sent him 3 questions to answer before I would make a decision. He answered all 3 within 24 hours. Clearly, completely, like someone who was taking me seriously. I invested, not because he is my brother, because the deal was good. But I will not pretend the other part did not matter too. The part where he sat in a hallway and said he should have asked. The part where he looked at me like a person capable of independent judgment. The part where, for the first time in the 31 years of our lives, the dynamic between us felt like it might actually have room to shift into something real. I closed my Series A 4 weeks later. The headline number was 44 million. Audra led the round. I did not tell my family when it happened. I did not send a press release. The Austin Business Journal ran a piece and I let it sit there without calling anyone's attention to it. But my mother called me. She said she had set a Google alert for my company name 2 years ago, back when she found the first article, and that her phone had notified her that morning. She said, $44 million, Leah. I laughed. I had not laughed with my mother in a long time, genuinely laughed, the kind that comes from actual surprise rather than politeness. I said, yeah, 44 million. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I should have asked you to tell me sooner. I said, you're asking now. She said, tell me everything. So I did. I have thought a lot about what it actually means to be underestimated by the people who are supposed to know you best, not strangers, not competitors, family, people who sat at the same dinner table, who remember the same vacations, who technically have access to every version of you that has ever existed, and still they see something smaller than what is there. For a long time I thought the problem was me. I thought if I explained myself better, or achieved something visible enough, or found the right moment to say, look what I am actually doing, they would update, they would see it. I kept waiting for that. What I understand now is that the people who have decided what you are tend to see only the data that confirms it. My father had decided I was the secondary child. My brother had decided I was the one who would need his network, his connections, his casual half-hearted help. That was not cruelty exactly. It was just the path of least resistance for people who had never been required to look harder. The thing about being consistently underestimated is that it gives you a choice. You can shrink into it, and some days I did. I spent years in that gap between who I was and who they thought I was, and it was lonely in a specific way that is hard to describe to someone who has not lived it. Not dramatic, just quiet and heavy, like carrying something no one else can see. Or you can build inside it. You can let the invisibility become the condition under which you do the actual work, undisturbed, without the weight of other people's expectations or their interference or their doubt dressed up as advice. That is what I ended up doing, though I did not frame it that way at the time. At the time I was just trying to solve a problem and keep the lights on. The night at the Meridian Club did not fix anything on its own. My father's almost apology was a beginning, not an ending. My brother and I are still figuring out what it looks like to be honest with each other after 30 years of a dynamic that was not honest at all. That takes time. I do not think there is a shortcut through it, but I keep coming back to something my brother said in that hallway, which was that he had been oblivious. Not malicious, oblivious, and I think about how much of the harm we do to the people closest to us comes, not from bad intentions, but from the simple failure to look, to ask, to notice that someone is carrying something real while we are busy talking about ourselves. The hardest thing I have learned is that I cannot build my sense of worth on other people. Finally, seeing me correctly, what Audra said that night mattered, and my brother's face when he did the math mattered, and I would be lying if I said the vindication felt like nothing. It did not feel like nothing. It felt like putting something down that I had been holding too long. But the $44 million was not the point. The work was the point. The problem I solved was the point. The clinics in Lubbock and Amarillo and every small town in between that are now spending less time on paperwork and more time with patients, that is the point. My father not attending my graduation did not make ClearPath real. My own 6 years of work made it real. If you are somewhere in the middle of being invisible, I want to say this. The invisibility is not the truth about you. It is information about where you are standing. Sometimes you have to build somewhere no one is watching before you have the freedom to build without interference. The watching comes later. Let it.